Imagine a factory assembly line, right? But instead of car parts or smartphones moving down the conveyor belt, the units of production are living, breathing beings.
Right.
Every single stage of their existence, literally from the moment they are born to the moment they die, is meticulously engineered for maximum efficiency and, well, profit.
Yeah, it sounds completely dystopian, like science
It
fiction.
really does. But today, we're going on a deep dive into a source that argues this isn't fiction at all. It's actually the everyday reality of our global food, clothing, and entertainment systems.
The source unpacking all of this is the 2018 documentary called Dominion, which was produced by the Farm Transparency Project.
Right.
And the central thesis of this film is that modern industries rely on this highly curated, hidden narrative of humane treatment. And they do this to completely mask the systemic commodification and suffering of animals on a scale that, honestly, most people just can't even comprehend.
Yeah, the scale is wild. But before we get into it, because the documentary we're looking at today is, incredibly graphic, emotionally charged, and obviously politically sensitive, I want to be totally upfront with you, the listener, right at the start.
Yeah, that's important to clarify.
Our goal today is not to endorse the viewpoints of the filmmakers or take a side or, tell you what to put on your dinner plate or wear in your closet. We are strictly here to act as a mirror. We're reflecting the film's arguments, the footage it presents, and its underlying philosophy.
Exactly. The mission is just to help you understand the massive cultural and ethical debate happening around this topic right now.
Right. So to really understand what the film is targeting, we have to grasp that sheer scale you mentioned.
Yeah, the scale is everything here.
Yeah.
Because the documentary isn't focused on, like, a single farmer acting maliciously, It's focused on systemic industrialized commodification.
Right.
The film uses historical data to show this massive shift toward industrialization. Like, for example, in the 1960s, Australia had around 50,000 pig farms. Today, that number is less than 1,400.
Wait, less than 1,400. But meat consumption certainly hasn't plummeted since the 60s.
Yeah.
I mean, if anything, total meat production has gone drastically up, right?
It has. Way up. As of 2015, the film notes that just 49 farms house 60% of the country's entire pig population.
Wow.
Yeah, it is an incomprehensible level of consolidation. And the documentary argues that this specific scale requires animals to basically be stripped of their individuality.
Because you just can't manage millions of living creatures without treating them as faceless units of production. The system just wouldn't work.
Exactly. It simply wouldn't function. So to really grasp how an assembly line of that scale operates, you have to look at the beginning of the line.
Right. And the film spends a lot of time on the most common farm animals, specifically pigs and poultry. It takes direct aim at that word, humane.
Yeah, the way they break down the life cycle of a pig in this system really highlights the engineering aspect. It starts in what they call a farrowing crate.
A farrowing crate.
Yeah, it's this small pen with a central cage where the mother pig, the sow, is kept. The design allows the piglets to feed, but it completely prevents the mother from moving around.
And the mechanical reason for this crate is just, it's fascinating and grim all at once.
Yeah.
Because the industry has selectively bred pigs to have artificially large litters, right?
Right. Litters that are far larger than the mother's body is naturally capable of handling or protecting.
So the crate actually prevents her from accidentally crushing your own overgrown litter.
Exactly. And furthermore, during her gestation, she can be confined for up to 16 weeks in a sow stall, unable to even turn around.
16 weeks. Just unable to turn around at all.
Yeah, and the film describes how keeping a heavy animal confined on a hard surface for that long, it inevitably leads to severe pressure sores and, in a lot of cases, partial paralysis.
God. And then there's the end of the line. The documentary heavily scrutinizes the slaughter process, specifically the carbon dioxide gas chamber, which the industry actually often promotes as the most humane and efficient option available.
They do, yeah. But the film explains the underlying mechanism of why this specific method is used, and it comes down to pure economics.
It's always economics.
Always. Lower concentrations of carbon dioxide would actually cause less pain and stress to the animal, but it would take much longer to render them unconscious, which slows down the processing line.
So heavily concentrated CO2 gas is used because it's economically viable to keep the line moving fast.
Exactly. And the documentary claims this heavy concentration effectively burns their eyes, nostrils, sinuses, throat, and lungs.
So they're basically suffocating from the inside out.
Yes, fully conscious and panicking as they are lowered into the gas in these rotating cages.
So the efficiency of the assembly line, dictates the method, not the comfort of the quote-unquote living unit. The biological engineering part of this is what I just can't wrap my head around, especially when the film moves over to the poultry side of the industry.
Oh, yeah. Poultry farming is presented as being even more engineered than mammalian farming.
Right, like in the egg industry.
Yeah.
The documentary highlights the use of macerators, which are essentially just massive industrial blenders.
Yeah, the macerator is perhaps the starkest example of the film's whole unit of production thesis. In the egg industry, male chicks are biologically useless to the bottom line.
Because they obviously can't lay eggs.
Right. And because they're a completely different genetic breed from the chickens explicitly raised for meat, they won't grow large enough, fast enough, to be profitable to feed and raise.
So the economic solution is just immediate disposal.
Exactly. On their very first day of life, they're sorted onto a conveyor belt and sent alive into a macerator.
And the film cites that this practice, which is entirely legal and standard, by the way, results in roughly 12 million deaths per year in Australia alone.
Just unbelievable numbers. And then the broiler chickens, the ones bred specifically for meat, they seem to suffer from the complete opposite problem.
They grow too fast.
Way too fast. The film points out these birds are selectively bred to reach a slaughter weight of 3 kilograms in just 35 days.
35 days. For context, naturally, that growth would take like 96 days, and they'd only peak at around 2 kilograms.
Exactly. So you're talking about a bird growing so fast, its skeletal system literally collapses under its own muscle mass. The documentary states this leads to a 90% rate of detectable abnormal gaits by the time they reach slaughter.
90%.
Mm-hmm.
And the turkeys, they're bred to be so massive, they physically can't even mate naturally anymore. The entire turkey industry relies completely on artificial insemination just to sustain the population.
Yeah, it's intense. Now, the inevitable question consumers ask when confronted with all these industrial realities is about the labels they see in the supermarket.
Right, the labels.
People rely on RSPCA-approved or free-range stickers to navigate these ethical waters. They assume those labels represent a fundamentally different system.
But the documentary argues those labels are largely just an illusion designed to comfort the buyer. Like, for instance, the film explains that bred free range for pigs simply means the piglets are born outside in small huts.
Right, just born there.
Yeah. Once they're weaned, they spend the rest of their entire lives confined in the exact same crowded, industrialized sheds as any other factory-farmed pig. So the marketing relies on the technicality of their birth, not the reality of their lifespan.
And the situation with free-range eggs relies on a similarly misunderstood technicality. National standards often cap free-range farms at 10,000 hens per hectare.
Which sounds like a lot of space, but...
Well, to understand why this fails the animal, you have to understand chicken biology. Chickens naturally live in a social hierarchy, a pecking order, but their cognitive limit for recognizing other individual birds is only about 100.
Oh, wow. So when you pack 10,000 of them into a single space?
That natural social structure completely breaks down. The birds are in a constant state of chaos and stress, which leads to severe feather pecking and cannibalism.
And furthermore, the film emphasizes that the destination never actually changes. Whether a chicken is caged, barn-laid, or labeled free range, the male chicks still go into the macerator on day one.
Right.
And the hens, once their egg production drops at around 18 months old, they all end up in the exact same electric stun baths and slaughterhouses. They fall drastically short of their natural 10-year lifespan.
Yeah, the fundamental treatment of the animal as a disposable commodity doesn't change. Literally only the marketing on the cardboard carton changes.
So we've established that the meat and egg industries use animals as commodities purely for economic survival, right? Where the death of the animal is the primary goal.
Yes.
But the film argues this exact same model underpins industries consumers typically view as totally harmless. There's this widespread assumption that industries like dairy, leather, or wool don't inherently require suffering because the animal isn't explicitly dying to make the milk or grow the wool.
But the documentary completely dismantles that misconception. It argues that these are not harmless byproducts, but highly profitable co-products that are inextricably linked to the same cycle of slaughter.
Right.
The dairy industry is probably the clearest example. The film stresses a fundamental biological fact that marketing often obscures cows, exactly like humans, only produce milk after giving birth.
So to maintain a constant profitable flow of milk, dairy cows have to be forcefully impregnated every single year.
Right. But because the milk is intended for human consumption, the calf can't be allowed to actually drink it. The calves are permanently separated from their mothers mere hours after birth.
Just hours.
Yeah. Female calves are typically raised to replace their mothers in the dairy cycle. But the male calves, they can't produce milk. In the industry, they are known as bobby calves.
And much like the male chicks in the egg industry, they're considered biological waste.
Exactly. The documentary states they are isolated for a few days and then just trucked to the slaughterhouse. In Australia alone, roughly 700,000 male calves are slaughtered as waste products of the dairy industry every single year.
700,000. You know, the way the film describes the economics of this really reminds me of an airline business model.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, most people assume an airline makes all its money on the hundreds of economy class tickets, right?
Okay.
In this scenario, economy class is the meat industry.
Okay, I follow.
But the hidden truth of aviation is that the incredibly expensive first-class tickets, along with the commercial cargo packed into the belly of the plane, are what actually make a flight incredibly lucrative.
Right.
The film argues that things like leather or fetal calf blood aren't just byproducts used to reduce waste. They are highly profitable co-products, the cargo in the belly of the plane that keep the entire slaughterhouse system highly profitable.
That's a great analogy. And the global leather trade perfectly illustrates that cargo concept. The documentary goes into immense detail about leather production in India to prove this point.
Right, because in India, cows are considered sacred, right,
Yeah.
which makes their slaughter illegal in most states.
Exactly. However, the Western demand for cheap leather is massive. So to supply that market legally, these animals must be transported hundreds or even thousands of kilometers across the country to exempt states, or just marched across the border into Bangladesh, where slaughter is permitted.
And the mechanical reality of that transport is just horrifying. The documentary details how these cows are crowded into trucks so tightly that their horns pierce each other's flesh.
Yeah.
And when they're marched on foot over massive distances and inevitably collapse from sheer exhaustion, the handlers resort to these brutal tactics just to keep the product moving.
Right, they have their tails deliberately broken or chili pepper aggressively rubbed into their eyes, literally just forcing them to stand back up and keep walking toward the slaughterhouse.
It's hard to even listen to. And the film applies this same harsh economic lens to the clothing industry too, right? Specifically regarding wool and down.
Yeah, it breaks down a practice called winter lambing. Farmers intentionally breed their sheep so that the mothers give birth in the harsh, freezing cold of winter.
Which sounds completely counterintuitive.
It does, but the biological mechanism here is entirely tied to the economic spreadsheet. By having lambs born in winter, they're ready to be weaned in the spring.
Ah,
Spring is when pastures are at their most fertile, which means the farmer doesn't have to pay for expensive supplemental feed to grow the lambs to market weight.
but the cost of timing nature to fit a spreadsheet is mass exposure. The documentary states that 10 to 15 million newborn lambs die within 48 hours of birth from the freezing cold.
Just staggering.
That is 1 in every 4 lambs. A 25% mortality rate is literally built into the business model as an acceptable loss because the savings on spring feed for the surviving 75% create a better overall profit margin.
Right. And the film also documents the live plucking of ducks and geese in China. These birds have their feathers painfully ripped out of their skin multiple times over their lifespan to fill down jackets and sleeping bags before they are finally slaughtered.
Wow. Okay, so we've explored how agriculture and clothing industries rationalize treating animals as biological machines. But the economic survival argument completely falls apart when the documentary transitions to spaces where humans claim to actually love and revere animals.
Exactly.
How does the film explain the exploitation in our homes, our entertainment, and our scientific research?
Well, this is where the cognitive dissonance of the whole system really comes into focus. The film looks at the pet industry, specifically puppy factories, where mother dogs are confined to barren cells 23 hours a day, treated as nothing more than breeding machines to supply pet stores.
And it looks at the massive wastage in the racing industry, too. The documentary highlights that 13,000 to 17,000 young, healthy greyhounds are killed annually in Australia simply because they aren't fast enough to win money.
13 to 17,000.
Yeah. And it also exposes the widespread illegal use of live animals like piglets and possums as bait to train those dogs.
Right, live baiting.
In horse racing, jumps racing is scrutinized for the high rate of falls and injuries, where horses that break a leg just quietly disappear to knackeries to be ground up into the very pet food we feed our dogs.
It's all connected. And when analyzing aquariums and zoos, the documentary leans heavily into a concept known as zoochosis.
Zoochosis.
Yeah. This refers to the repetitive, abnormal psychological behaviors seen in captive animals pacing, swaying, or self-mutilation. The mechanism of zoochosis is the total deprivation of an animal's natural evolutionary drives.
Right.
The film highlights polar bears, which are biologically adapted to swim massive distances in freezing Arctic waters. Placing that animal in a concrete enclosure roughly 30 by 40 meters wide in the sweltering tropical heat of Queensland, it inevitably causes a psychological break.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
The film also looks at dolphins performing tricks for food in small pools. It draws a direct, incredibly dark line from these global dolphin parks back to the brutal dolphin hunts in Taiji, Japan.
Yeah, the argument is that the lucrative demand from Western and Asian aquariums for a few captive performers completely funds the slaughter of the rest of the pod.
And even in the realm of scientific research, where animal testing is often defended as a necessary evil for human advancement, the documentary questions the scientific validity of the practice itself.
They do.
It cites a staggering study from the National Institutes of Health stating that 95% of drugs proven safe and effective in animal testing go on to fail in human trials, which strongly suggests the animal model is just fundamentally flawed.
And, the real insight for the listener here isn't just a list of brutal practices, it's the profound psychological disconnect required to maintain them.
Right.
Society has created this highly arbitrary categorization system for animals. A dog or a cat is classified as a companion, a family member protected by strict animal cruelty laws. Yet a pig, which science shows is equally, if not more, intelligent than a dog, is classified as livestock. A tool, a unit of production where those exact same cruelty laws intentionally do not apply.
The documentary asserts a deeply challenging philosophical point here. There is no humane way to kill someone who frantically fights for their life. The fear, the panic, and the desire to live are universal across species, regardless of which conceptual category human beings have placed them in.
Which perfectly sets up the final, massive macro perspective the film takes. It zooms all the way out from the individual farm, from the individual slaughterhouse, and from the psychology of the consumer to look at the global impact of this philosophy.
And the environmental data they present is staggering.
It really is. The film points out that animal agriculture emits more greenhouse gases than any other industry on the planet. But perhaps the most jarring statistic focuses on the sheer inefficiency of global food distribution.
Right.
The documentary claims that the world's cattle currently consume a quantity of food equal to the caloric needs of 8.7 billion humans.
That is enough food to feed more than the entire human population on Earth. Yet, as the film points out, nearly 800 million human beings suffer from chronic undernourishment right now.
Yes.
The logistical reality is that we are growing massive amounts of food, feeding it to animals, and losing the vast majority of those calories in the biological conversion process, just to get a tiny fraction back as meat.
Exactly. The system is presented as not just cruel, but wildly inefficient and destructive on a planetary scale.
So what is the root cause of all of this, according to the film? The documentary argues it all boils down to a superiority complex. This is the dominion philosophy that actually gives the film its title.
Right, dominion.
Humanity operates on this deeply ingrained belief that because animals lack our specific type of human intelligence, or because they're physically weaker and can't defend themselves against our technology, we have inherently earned the right to exercise total dominion over them.
And the filmmakers use a historically agonizing comparison here to make their ultimate point. The documentary argues that this underlying logic that makes right, that a perceived intellectual or physical superiority justifies total exploitation, is the exact same ideological justification used during some of the darkest periods of human history.
Yeah.
The film explicitly compares this mindset of commodifying living beings to the justifications used for human slavery and by the Nazis during the Holocaust.
It is an incredibly heavy, controversial comparison. But the filmmakers use it deliberately to shatter the defense of normalcy.
Right. They are asking the viewer to consider whether history is actually a valid defense for morality. Just because eating, wearing, and using animals is something humanity has done for our entire recorded history, does that make it ethically sound today when we have alternatives?
It really challenges the audience to ask if our superiority complex defines us,
Yeah.
or if we possess the capacity to evolve past a global system reliant on mass suffering.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today.
We really have. Dominion attempts to violently pull back the curtain on the comforting narrative of the humane farm. It presents a vast, deeply industrialized global system where living beings are reduced entirely to commodities, whether that's in the meat and dairy industries, fashion, entertainment, or science.
And it argues that this entire apparatus is driven not by necessity, but by profit, human convenience, and an unquestioned philosophy of supremacy.
The immediate relevance here is about your role as a consumer listening to this, navigating a highly marketed world. When you walk down a supermarket aisle surrounded by pastoral imagery, organic stickers, and RSPCA-approved labels, this documentary challenges you to look past the packaging.
It demands that you look the supply chain itself, at the farrowing crates, the macerators, and the CO2 chambers, and ask yourself if the marketing actually matches the physical reality of the process.
Are you buying a carefully raised product, or are you buying a narrative specifically designed to absolve you of cognitive dissonance? I will leave you with a final thought to mull over. We started this deep dive by picturing a factory assembly line of living beings. The documentary argues that this hidden reality is deliberately kept out of sight, because if everyday consumers truly saw the mechanisms of that assembly line, they wouldn't support it. Out of sight, out of mind.
The entire system totally relies on secrecy.
But what happens if that secrecy fails? If the hidden realities shown in documentaries like Dominion become common, undeniable public knowledge in the near future, how might that force our legal systems to change?
Oh, well, yeah.
Will the definition of words like humane or ethical have to be strictly redefined in our advertising laws? If the assembly line is fully exposed to the daylight, will future generations look back at our brightly lit supermarket shelves the exact same way we look back on the outdated, indefensible historical practices of our ancestors?
It's a profound paradigm shift to consider, and one that the film insists is already beginning.
Thank you for joining us on this intense and thought-provoking deep dive. We'll see you next time.